Hi, Eric here with 30x40 Design Workshop. Today we're in the studio. We're just getting finished up with the plywood walls, and I want to talk about a few of the details that relate to finishing walls or ceilings in plywood. There's sort of four main points that we're going to touch on. We're going to talk about the thickness, we're going to talk about the faces and the cores, we're going to talk about the attachment of the panels, and then we're going to round it out by talking about the finishing of the plywood panels. And that'll take the most time here since it's sort of the most complex. So let's begin with thickness. Now, plywood comes in many different thicknesses, all the way from 1/4 inch up to over 1 inch or more. In general, for wall or ceiling finishes, you're going to be looking at a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch stock. And we have a veneer on top of that, and it's a very thin veneer, as you can see looking here. And it has veneer on both sides. If we go to a thicker panel, now this is a 1/2 inch panel, which is what I've used on the walls here. Thicker panels generally are subject to less warping, less movement due to humidity, and less seasonal movement. And they also telescope fewer of the imperfections of the underlying wall framing. Now, wall framing is pretty imperfect stuff, so if you have inconsistencies, a thinner panel will tend to telescope those details out to the finished wall surface or ceiling surface more readily. So thicker panels are usually better. Obviously, the thicker the panel, the more expensive it is. A 1/2 inch sheet of 4x8 veneer fir plywood, vertical grain plywood, which is what we used for this project here, is about $102 a sheet. 3/4 inch goes up from there. And it'll also depend on what the veneer stock is that you're using. So as I said, we used a vertical grain fir here. Different mahoganies, things will be more or less expensive. Now, the second thing we'll talk about here are the faces and the cores. I recommend staying away from the imported sort of Chinese plywoods. These often you'll find at Home Depot. You want to try and stick to an American core if you possibly can. But you want the cores for all of your veneer stock. Now, this is a small project, so there's only about 20 or 22 sheets of plywood for the entire project. If you can, get them all from the same lot. Now, your veneers are going to be different between the different sheets unless you specify them being from a similar flitch. You can actually go and pick the flitches. But you want to make sure that the cores are definitely the same between them. These are, it looks like sort of 3 plies in here, and then we have our face plies for the 1/2 inch plywood. This is a poplar core, and all of the sheets are basically the same. Now, one last thing I wanted to mention about this is that there's a clear front and back side to these panels, and the back side tends to be more stripy. And I don't know if you can see that here, but it's composed of these different bands of these veneers. This would be the back side, and this, as we get into looking at the different finishes that we're applying here, would be the front side. It's generally more even. The better veneers are on the face there. Now, when you're cutting these pieces, you really do want to use this frog tape, this green tape here, and you want to have a means of protecting the face veneer from any blowout or chip out that happens with your saw blade. So that's something to pay attention to. You can see on the back side here, we have a little bit of chip out here that's happening along this edge. And you just need to protect against that depending on what your edge details are. Okay, now for attachment. A couple of things you need to really pay attention to. You need to first think about what the goals of the attachment are. If you want a completely concealed system, that's totally possible. I considered basically 2 options for the attachment for my panels. One was a exposed fastener, so you'd see the fastener on the finished face, and the other was a concealed fastener. Now, with exposed fasteners in particular, you're going to have to pay particular attention to where the underlying framing lines up. Your panel joints, are your panels going to align vertically? Are they going to be positioned horizontally? Because at the edges of each one of these panels, and potentially in the middles too, you're going to want to be fastening your panel to the underlying framing. And so planning those joints and planning where your plywood seams are going to happen is important to do early on. Not everyone's thinking about that during the framing phase, but it's a really important thing to consider. Now, if you want to go with a concealed joint, it's a little bit less critical, but you're still going to need to think about where your joints lie and how they align with other materials. Now, I did, as I said, consider a concealed system, and the clips that I looked at, this is almost like a French cleat that you would hang a cabinet on a wall with. And basically, this is an extruded aluminum piece. These clips are about 50 cents each. These are made by Monarch Metals. And basically what you do is you come to attach them to the back side of your panel. You can see this is the face that's not in the finished face of this panel. You attach a cleat to the back side here, and you attach the other cleat to the wall framing. Now in this case I'm just using a scrap piece of the plywood, but these two pieces then mate up. And so with this clip attached to the back side of our finished panel, they come to the wall system here and latch on like that. So you can see it adds a little bit of depth to the wall assembly. It's about 1/4 of an inch, but the panels are infinitely removable and relocatable. So that's sort of a nice system. Now, you still have to plan on how these panels actually line up and where the joints happen and how this fits in and around things like light boxes, your receptacles, things like that, because there is a vertical positioning that needs to happen. So you can see, in order to get these clips to mate, you need to have one panel that sits higher than the other and then it drops into place. So putting this against a wall system, as it falls into place, you can see you need some clearance at the head, or you need some means of hiding that joint at the head of the wall assembly. Now we planned for this in the framing so it would be possible. We had a couple of options. As we got closer to actually applying this finish to the walls, we decided not to do that for cost and time reasons. So it's a little bit more involved. And I actually like the way, we did a mock-up, and I actually like the way the fasteners look at the face of the panel. And as you can see, they're hardly visible here. So I used a trim head screw. And one of the things that you could do that I recommend is get a screw that has reversing threads on it. So the reversing threads, and this is just a standard GRK screw, it's not the screw we used, but it gives you an idea that there's a regular threading of the screw that happens down here on the shank, and then toward the end there is a reverse thread. And the benefit of having that is once you get the plywood panel attached to the wall, these seams are not going to totally align. And so having a reverse thread at the end of this screw allows you to adjust the panel joints in and out so you can get a perfectly level surface, perfectly smooth surface. Okay, the other thing you want to consider is as you're doing your electrical rough-in, you want to make sure that you're using adjustable boxes. Now we spray foamed the walls here, so that really tends to lock the boxes in place. What we had to do after it was foamed was go in and dig out all the foam around it, around the electrical box, so we could adjust these boxes in and out. And as the plywood, as we're talking about adjusting these panels, because they're not going to be perfect, you want to build adjustability into the other aspects of the project, things like the electrical rough-in and receptacles, things like that. Now the last thing we'll get to here is finishing, and I realize we're getting a little long on time. When you're considering finishing, there's polyurethanes, shellacs, varnishes, lacquers, water-based, oil-based. You know, how do you choose? Basically what I recommend is you need to sort of look at the project goals. And for me, the project goals were basically 4 parts. One, I wanted it to be low sheen. I wanted it to be a natural appearance. I want to preserve the natural look of the fur here. I really like how it, you know, the sort of natural tone of it and the natural graining of it. So that was goal 1. I wanted the finish that we're going to use to be easy to apply. So ideally it would be a wipe-on finish, nothing that required a lot of sanding in between coats. Protection was not a prime goal of mine, so I didn't really figure into this equation. And the last thing was a non-yellowing finish. I don't like the look of a fir or any other wood that really goes to a dark yellow. And so once we introduce this sort of idea of a non-yellowing finish, it really starts to eliminate things. Oil-based finishes are really out. They tend to add an amber tint to everything, and that's because of the nitrocellulose that's used in oil-based finishes, which leaves us a couple of different options. Now I've done a couple of oil-based finishes here on this board just because I wanted to sort of explore it, and the easiest one that I can think of was a Danish oil, like a Watco oil. And you can see it really does bring out the life of the grain and the life of the wood. The top band here is with the finish applied, and the bottom band is a comparative similar graining without any finish at all. So you can see the Watco finish here definitely darkens the finish here, the grain of the wood, pulls the grain of the wood out. It's pretty subtle, but over time, what's deceiving about this is over time this will go quite dark. this will yellow quite a bit. So oil finishes, pretty much out. As we look at the spar urethane, you'll notice that this spar urethane here, again, an oil-based urethane finish, has a gloss to it, and that's because the only sample that I had, sample can here, this Helmsman spar urethane, was a clear semi-gloss. But you can see it definitely brings out the grain of the wood. It's quite nice in that respect, but over the life of this, and even in the time since I've applied it, it really starts to yellow out and has an unattractive appearance. So if we sort of discount the oil-based finishes, then we move on to finishes like soap. And the natural soap finish here, as I was doing research on sort of classic Danish furniture finishes, all the Hans Wegner chairs are finished in a soap finish, really beautiful, lustrous finishes. What I found was, as I made up the paste and I applied, this is 4 coats of the soap finish. Yes, it's beautiful, it's soft, it's a really great finish to touch, but it provides sort of no character or luster to the surface. And I just felt like it was something that I could easily discount. We have things like waxes. Now, a paste finishing wax, such as this min wax, is not really a finish per se, and actually it will go yellow with time. So again, I was able to easily discount this as a finish. We talked about the Watco finish. We can move into other finishes like a water-based poly here, and this is a min wax product. The water-based finishes in general are very white. They dry clear, they're non-toxic, they're fairly easy to apply, and so this water-based polyurethane finish is probably a good choice. You can see it does bring out some of the grain, but it is fairly flat in its appearance and its feel. There is a low luster to it. It's a film-forming finish, so it sits on top of the wood. This may be a little bit more than what I signed up for on this, and I haven't made a final decision yet. One other finish that I want to mention that I've used in the past, and I've used it actually on this piece here, you can see this little stool that I made, is a Danish finish made by the company called Woka. And this piece here, this is made out of eastern white pine. This was actually treated with a wood lye. So they make a lye finish, and the lye basically acts as a bleach. It pulls all the sort of yellow tonation out of the pine here. And then that's a fairly toxic treatment, I will say. And then this piece is finished with a white oil. So this is a pigmented oil, and it actually works to sort of circumvent some of the problems that you have with oil where it really starts to yellow. This white pigment, though, sits in some of the graining of this wood. And so if you have an open-grained wood, sometimes this finish can appear as dusty. And you can see here, it's fairly subtle. I think it meets a lot of the objectives that I've pointed out here. So it's got low sheen, obviously. Fairly easy to apply when we're talking about just a white oil finish. And it's definitely non-yellowing. There is this toxic component to the wood lye, and the way the wood lye may interact with the concrete floor that we have here is something that I'm still considering. That's an extra step to this finish. So you can see the lye and the white oil sit here, and the white oil alone sits on this side. Fairly subtle difference between the two. I think you'd be hard pressed to really point that out. Now certainly we could do more coats of this and build up more of a sheen, but when I have this amount of surface area in the studio to do, not totally excited about that. So lots to think about here from a finishing standpoint. We figured out the details in the installation quite quickly. The finishing will take a little bit longer. Woods that are particularly photoreactive, such as fir, definitely need some sort of treatment to keep them from darkening over time. And so it's something I'm going to be weighing and something I'm going to be continuing to experiment with. All right, so hope this was helpful. Leave comments in the video if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.